Sekiro is probably my favorite From Software game, hands down. The Souls formula had been getting stale for me since the team had released Demon's Souls. Just think about it. Demon's Souls was released all the way back in 2006, which, wow, I can't believe it's been that long already. I'm getting old. Dark Souls then took 5 years to release, releasing in 2011, and just, wow, how were they gonna top this? There was so much that Dark Souls had improved upon from Demon's Souls, and I couldn't imagine a better sequel being created. Then Dark Souls 2 came out, and ew, ugh, yuck, ugh, this game was bad. Then Dark Souls 3 came out in 2016, and while I've come to appreciate it now, I was just sick and tired of the formula at the time and wasn't interested in the same old, same old. That's why when Sekiro released, it was such a breath of fresh air for me to play. The complexity in the game's combat, the shinobi prosthetics, an actual character with an established backstory, and especially the bosses. All of these things combined made Sekiro an incredibly refined and polished experience. And when I hold Sekiro up to Elden Ring, I have to say that at least in terms of boss design, Elden Ring pales in comparison. I know I touched on this a bit previously in my endgame bosses video, but we're really going to dive deep into the topic with this one. So first, let's talk about boss aggressiveness. In Sekiro, these bosses do not quit coming after you, and it makes for a fast-paced, action-packed battle that also requires patience. I know that sounds contradictory, but Sekiro has this balancing act within its combat that's done really well, and it's due to two things in particular: your ability to parry and the posture system. Both you and the boss have a meter that indicates your posture. By parrying the boss's attacks, you passively build up the boss's posture gauge to the point where you can get a death blow in that automatically kills the boss, or takes away a death blow gauge if the boss can take more than one death blow. This system is genius because it rewards the player for learning a boss's patterns and parrying accordingly, without incentivizing the need to openly attack on your own. This system was a good idea to implement because some of the bosses in Sekiro have these insanely long combo chains that you can only counter through parries of your own and managing your posture gauge properly so you don't get guard broken. If these bosses were created with just their health bars in mind, I can't imagine how frustrating and long some of these fights would be. So it's really good that you have options when it comes to the combat here. Still, that doesn't mean you just have to solely play defensively. You can play offensively and it work out just as well. When you're good at Sekiro, you'll know it because you'll be weaving in attacks of your own along with your perfectly timed parries, becoming literally untouchable as you make your way toward death-blowing the boss in style. But parries are just one piece of the puzzle here. You have jump vaulting, Mikiri counters, stealth kills on bosses, the shinobi prosthetics. There's so many different ways you can approach and defeat a boss that it is absolutely insane. In Elden Ring, none of what I just said really applies here. The bosses are just as aggressive as they are in Sekiro, and when you have a long combo chain coming at you, all you have is a dodge roll, and it's simply not enough to dodge all of the attacks that these bosses want to throw at you. There's no jumps, Mikiri counters, none of it. Now, some want to argue that the Spirit Ashes can be a useful tool. These things are the most sorry excuse for the boss design in Elden Ring, I'm sorry. If you don't have enough FP to use any of the good ones, they're practically worthless anyway, and even when you do, summoning them makes the boss a snore fest. Many wanted to argue that I wasn't using all the tools properly in Elden Ring to make some of the endgame bosses easier, and while I would agree, I would argue that these Spirit Ashes are like a band-aid solution to a huge gaping hole in the game's boss design. All the Spirit Ashes really do is serve as another target for the boss to go and wail on so that you can go get in a few hits of your own while they're distracted and rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. Now, anyone who's been a Souls fan since the beginning knows how boring this is. That's the whole reason why the community has been so behind soloing bosses by yourself for so long and frowned at the mention of using multiplayer summons for a boss. You didn't actually learn how to take the boss down if you used a summon spirit, and it's not the player's fault. It's the game's fault for allowing a tool like this to be used during boss fights to make up for the fact that the players literally have nothing else that's good in their toolset to use against these bosses other than summon spirits. All the other tools in Sekiro are skill-based tools. Mikiri counters? Those don't just happen with the press of a button. You have to properly time it and dodge into the attack in order for it to work correctly. Time it wrong and you're getting severely punished. Same goes for jump counters, parries, or literally anything else within that game. The tools in Elden Ring just serve to make you more overpowered to the point where fighting the boss becomes trivial, like spirit ashes, powerful magic spells, so on and so forth. And I think that's where the biggest problem between the two really lies. Now, I think there is some fun to be had in having the freedom to create your own build in Elden Ring and create this powerful sorcerer or this badass greatsword wielding warrior, but when one is more viable to use against bosses than the other, that's when you have a balancing problem on your hands. Sekiro never had this problem because you never had the freedom to do something like that. But Elden Ring does, and its wildly different power scaling depending on what build you decided to go with at the start makes the bosses either a really tooth-grinding, tough, unfun experience, or an easy magic-blasting, damage-dealing, suck-it-up boss health like it's a Slurpee experience. I want to reference a boss in Sekiro and compare it to Malenia in Elden Ring. The Long-Arm Centipede. This dude was a skill check within Sekiro. If you knew how the parry and posture system worked, this boss was probably one of the funnest fights in the game for you. If not, then you probably got your ass handed to you. This is how you know boss design within a game is good. When the game teaches you certain skills, expects you to learn them, and then tests you with their application within a boss fight. Elden Ring's bosses, on the other hand, never feel like you're applying a learned lesson though. Each one feels like it's trying to top the other in terms of grandeur and difficulty all the way up to Malenia. And while I do think Malenia is a fun fight, her waterfowl dance is something that feels very similar to the Long-Arm Centipede fight. If you didn't know how to parry, it feels unfair and stupid when you die to his swipes because you sit there like, how the hell am I supposed to dodge all that, or block all of that, or even parry all of it? That's until you get the timing down, almost like a rhythm game before flawlessly finishing the boss. Whereas with Malenia, you have none of those tools. You can't parry her waterfowl dance. No, you just sit there and get shit on by it constantly. So there's no real lesson to be learned here. Like I said in my previous video, it's all about getting the right RNG to just hopefully get past the boss. That is, unless you have some OP-ass summon spirit, or if you summon some help to gank the boss with, or if you blast them with an OP magic spell if you were lucky enough to go with a magic build, or even if you use a very specific build like the Fingerprint Great Shield and poke at her slowly but surely until she dies. Yeah, that's a lot of fun to do, you know, just fight her like that and hold L1 the whole way through. See, in Sekiro, you get stronger by fighting the bosses, and that's that. Plain and simple. There's no secret weapon that's better than one versus the other, or some crazy spell that'll demolish the boss's health. No, you're either good enough to defeat the boss, or you're not. And I kind of miss that simplicity that Sekiro gives the player in exchange for an extremely well-tuned difficulty curve and extremely fair boss design. In Elden Ring, there's no denying that certain builds or certain weapons are better against certain bosses, and you need to adapt and change your gear in order to have an easier time. But it almost never has anything to do with your skill, and almost always something to do with the weapon you're currently using or the build that you currently have, making it a necessity to respec to a more powerful meta build later on in a game that was supposed to be about the freedom to create whatever kind of warrior you wanted. And for those reasons and more, I much prefer Sekiro's bosses to Elden Ring's overall. Plus, you really can't beat the feeling when those swords start clashing until finally you've exchanged enough blows to get that epic execution. I'll be right back. I gotta go play some more Sekiro, guys.